This is the strategy inside everything. I'm Adam Pierno. All right, welcome back to another episode of the strategy inside everything. I am excited today because we are going to talk to someone I've known for a while, but in typical digital fashion, I haven't really met until just now. So we've been talking for almost 20 minutes, and then I remembered we have to record an episode and make this a productive conversation. So if you would, please welcome my guest today is Ben Perreira. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad to be talking to you and spending time with you. And thanks for making time to join us.
Thanks, man. It's my pleasure.
So Ben, you are currently Senior Manager of Integrated Digital Strategy at Mattel. But your career, you've been at a lot of agencies. You've been at Condé Nast. Agencies big and small in a lot of different roles. You freelanced around as well. So I'm interested in hearing how you the shape of your career before we get into the topic and how you got to Mattel, if you wouldn't mind giving people a little background.
Yeah, of course. It's been a bit of a wander. I started when I got out of undergrad. I wanted to work in marketing, but I didn't know how to get into it. I didn't know what agencies were. I studied sociology. And was kind of just in this bubble where I was really interested in the academics of it, and I was interested in surfing, and that was it. And so I got out, and the real world kind of hit me, and I was working odd jobs, and I ended up working for an agent for about a year and a half, working on this project that eventually became what is now the World Surf League, but was at that point was just kind of a pipe dream that a few people had.
Did you think it was going to work?
I didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was a really good idea.
But what did you think? You didn't think the appetite was there?
I didn't think, well, I guess it was one of those things that became really clear as we went through it, that there were just a lot of structural barriers. You had, there were a lot of people who had vested interests in keeping things the way they were.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
So we tried to storm the castle. We failed. But it was 2 or 3 years later, a few of the same people got back together, and the idea rose from the ashes. And it's been really cool to see.
Yeah.
I can't take any credit for what it is now, but it was a really cool thing at 23 or so to be thrust into. And I was, I'd be like on the phone or emailing with tourism boards in Ireland or Barbados, and we were trying to come up with this separate tour and meeting sports agents, and the plan was the next year to be gone the whole year, to be on this tour that I was planning. So I'm like, okay, Ireland, sounds cool. Barbados sounds cool. All these, Morocco, I think we were planning on.
You got to plan it all, but you didn't get to go.
Yep.
Oh, that's
yep. And then, so I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I knew that I didn't have any formal business education. I'd never taken a business class. And so I wanted that base. And one of the people that I'd worked for was a Harvard MBA. And I saw how he carried himself, and, with this kind of confidence, and he had a lot of knowledge that I felt like I, would benefit from.
Yeah.
So I was unemployed. I was like, okay, I'll go back to school. I'd been planning on getting an MBA at some point. I think I was 24. I was just about 3 years out of school when I started at LMU. So I would recommend, I get asked a lot, I would recommend you wait. If anyone out there is listening, I recommend knowing what you want to do, having a really clear sense of what an MBA will unlock for you, as opposed to doing it because you have a lot of free time and you can't figure out what to do. But
did you do it full time, or did you do it part time around a job?
I did it full time.
Yeah. Okay. That's a big commitment.
Yeah. So it was, I kind of dove in head first and met a lot of interesting people, obviously learned a ton, and became really interested in the startup world. At that point, Google had been in LA, but they had just moved to the West Side. Snapchat hadn't quite opened up in Venice yet, but it was sort of around the time that there was this nascent tech scene. Silicon Beach was just, that term was just being applied there. So I ended up working with this guy who was ex-Google, ex-YouTube. He was kind of YouTube's first creator-focused salesperson. This is 2011 that I met him. So it had been, I think he started Google in 2007 or so.
Oh, wow.
And he had this idea that at the time we talked about it as Clout meets Kickstarter. So it was which kind of dates it appropriately. The idea was to let content creators reward their fans for getting views or getting follows. And he ended up building the company and then selling it a few years later. And he's still one of my mentors, and I'm lucky to call him that. But I fast forward to me finishing school, I still didn't know what I was going to do. I had met a lot of people who worked in agencies, and it's kind of a funny story. So I met this girl who was I think she was an account director at Saatchi LA, and she had an account executive opening. And I'm like, I need a job. I need something. And I think it paid.
Yeah, you get to that degree and you're like, okay, now it's time. Like, I've got to use this knowledge. I've got to pay off this degree here. How are we going to do this?
And, to put it into perspective, I think up to that point, I got a letter from the IRS at one point that outlined what I had made like the previous 5 years. And it was like 17,000, 13,000, 14. Like, it was not.
They were like, we don't believe that you only made this much. You're not reporting something.
It was just like, I was figuring out how to get by, and I was living in Venice at the time. Now you have to be a multimillionaire to live in Venice. But at the time, whatever, it was working. I think the job, say it paid like 50 grand or 50. I was like, this is incredible. This is more than I've made the last 3 years combined. I just need this job. So I'm interviewing, and they're talking through the day-to-day and talking through all the different departments. And they're like, there's like production, this is what they do, creative, what they do. And then we have this other department that they do research, they go into people's houses, they interview them.
And you really didn't know what was what?
No, I didn't know what any of this stuff was. And I'm like, that's cool. That sounds really interesting, but I don't care. I need this job that I'm interviewing for because I need to make some money, within a month. I didn't get the job. And then like a month later, I get an email from a recruiter at Conil, which is Saatchi's Hispanic agency, which was in the bottom floor of that same building.
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, we have this planning opening on T-Mobile. We're doing a rebrand of T-Mobile. And I'm like, oh, this is that job that account director at Saatchi had been talking about. So I tripped and fell into this profession. It's pretty, it's pretty absurd.
I think we all do. I think it's all kind of an accident.
So, of course, I get that gig. And 3 weeks later, I'm, in the back behind the glass in New York, watching focus groups in Spanish, which I speak enough Spanish to get in trouble. But, I'm kind of just straight into it, just immersed into being a planner. And, fast forward, a couple of years, I worked for Conil for a little while, for about 9 months. I was on this kind of permanent month-to-month freelance thing, freelance at a couple different Hispanic agencies, because, you kind of, once you've done that, I was kind of Hispanic marketing guy. And then found out about a job at Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, they've had Hyundai forever. They had never really had a planner on their retail business. And so, they had just used strategy and put it against .com and brand and doing product launches. But, the retail is just this machine, and your budget's like $40.
I know.
And you just kind of, it's strategy light, right? But for me, it was a perfect gig at that time because it was reps. I was writing several briefs a day. It was like, okay, we're doing an out-of-home thing in Connecticut. All right, well, who's driving by? What are we trying to communicate? What do they care about? Who's our client?
You just got like the quick, let's bang through it. Let me quickly figure out, what do I need to know? What can I know? What can't I know? What do I need people to do? Who's available to help bring something to life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do I feed the creative process, without slowing it down, is ultimately what I learned how to do. So did that for, I think I was there just under a year. And then I got recruited to go to Deutsch to work on Volkswagen. And then 6 months later, Dieselgate hit. So I got, baby's first crisis, which was a wild ride. Made a lot of great friends there. I was there for 4 years. I worked in Volkswagen for 3 of that. We defended the business a couple times. The last, a losing battle, but then got to work on H&R Block and Zillow and do some positioning and product launch work on
That's
that.
cool.
And then Condé and then Mattel.
And what do you see as some of the differences going from, so you've been at startups, you've been at agencies, you've been at Condé is an in-house job, but it's also a publisher and they have serious hardcore brands in their portfolio. How do you see the difference between agency world and being inside a brand like Mattel, where there's these, I mean, the brands inside Mattel are how every one of them is a household name, or, there's just so many famous brands in there.
It's it's dramatically different. It's I think I was talking to I'd reached out to Katie Drecky, who's just incredible. If I'm sure you're familiar with her, and we were talking about this because I think she started as a planner. I think she went back and forth actually. I think she was a planner and then Adidas and then planner again and then Nike. But the way she described it really stuck with me, which is the metabolism is really different. An agency,
that's a great way to say it.
At an agency, you just burn hard. You're like, okay, everyone knows your product. It's the simplest business. That your product is just coming up with great ideas. Can you do it and can you execute it? On our side, there's a lot. What I didn't realize then is we're getting the ball on the, on the goal line. At an agency, you're getting the ball on the goal line. The client has done. We've had a million meetings about this stuff. We've, I don't personally, but someone's, has talked to legal or has secured a budget. The budget's been revised. You've got way more stakeholders than your quote unquote client when you're on the agency side. That's just the person who's, giving you instructions, and it should just be 1 or 2 people. So the speed is way different, and the creative expectation. I think everyone, even the people at the entry level or the receptionist or whoever in an agency is expected to, kind of have a little bit of a creative edge. You're supposed to kind of push yourself to be creative.
And on demand.
On demand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that, that's just not the expectation on this side. The expectation is to be buttoned up, to have to create a business case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it's like, let's create a business case that leaves open, that crack for creativity to come in.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just kind of, the word I hate the most is anniversary. We'll just like anniversary our plans. You're just like, we'll just change the date. All right, 2021.
Let's not do that. Unless last year deserves an anniversary that we run it back. Like, let's not do that. That's not a good thing. I think the word I hate more than anniversary is compliance. I think when I get into something in the strategy I'm writing, it's all about compliance. I'm like, oh no, this is not going to be an enjoyable project for anybody.
Yeah. So it's an adjustment, right? Because we're used to, and there are plenty of us at Mattel, at least, who are ex-agency. But you kind of get used to, like, on an agency, you're like, I guess maybe an analogy is like a soccer team versus a baseball team. Like in an agency, you're playing soccer and it's just like, we score, we have roles, we have a set play, but it's relatively simple how we try and win. Where at Mattel, it's like, you've got a closer, you've got a right fielder, you've got like everyone has is so fucking good at,
and there's an established role for sure. Like, everybody has a spot that they are in that is their particular corner of the field. That's a definite distinction from a lot of agencies where, people are really, really tight in the responsibilities that they have.
Yeah, and if you and for most, definitely not all, but for a lot of agency people, if you moved everyone around, the work would get done. It would still be, 75% is good. I
Yeah.
don't think that's the case on the client side.
No, it would cause chaos for most brands that I've been inside of. That's what I've observed. But is the process of strategy similar? Like, you posted a tweet that I have on my screen here, and you said that it takes a ton of repetition for clients, colleagues, and creatives to ingest a strategy fully. And you said, as a rule of thumb, repeat it simply and clearly until they tell you to shut the hell up. And I read it, and that resonated with me immediately. And I can think back to times in the agency where I had to do that, where I had to keep saying, remember, guys, we're doing this. Okay, that's good. 2 seconds later, but we're doing this, right? Remember, we're doing this. Do you find that that's the same across, startups and across the different types of agencies that you've been at? Because Deutsche is a lot different than an Ocean, just the volume and speed of that work. Is it the same mechanism of repetition?
I think if anything, it's more on the client side. It's the more complex. On Condé was the same way, because the more different interests you have, the more you have to kind of thread that needle and make sure you go, okay, this is the narrative. Now, if something's going to change that, let's change the narrative. But, I think when you're on a brand, like, I've never worked on Subaru, but I always think about a brand like that, or an Apple, brands that are probably a little bit boring to work on, because the strategy, the creative kind of tonality, it's so consistent, and that's
so
what makes
it's nailed down so tight.
Right. I don't know that the repetition is necessarily as important there, because everyone, it's kind of gospel at that point.
That's interesting. I think Apple and Subaru are great examples to compare to each other too, because for Apple, you could see that it becomes, you're right, the core strategy is the same, that's nailed down tight. But then these are the features we have to talk about, and we have to figure out a way that the strategy for an individual communication becomes, what feature will we promote and show delight? How are we going to animate that? And then for Subaru, it's just like, how are we going to get a dog in this ad? We gotta figure out a way to get a dog in here somewhere.
How old is the couple? Are they like 36 or more like 38? Or,
No, I think they got to be 37 this year. We did 36 last year. Yeah, exactly.
It's it's got to be maddening. I'm sure the creatives are like, it's probably really boring to work on, but again, I think that's the, I kind of aspire to work on a brand like that, that's so consistent, that's so itself, that that everyone kind of gets it, right? But that I think is what we're chasing in some ways with, and I think within Mattel's portfolio, there are brands that are closer to that people just get, and that probably don't require a lot of education. They have their own histories. They've kind of created narratives and worlds that live in YouTube and advertising and in the product itself, outside experiences. There are others that, are kind of like trying to figure out what they are, and have done a lot of really cool things, but need some pruning to get to be the shape that they should be.
Yeah.
And I think for us on the client side, we have a lot more things pulling us in different directions. We have 3 different insights groups, for instance. So you always have, we have this embarrassment of riches when it comes to information. But that also means that, any report that comes out can be a little bit of an inkblot test that can pull you off the strategy. So I think having a clear sense of what that narrative is, and just continuing to beat that drum. So, you can't assume that, the 75 people or so that you interface with remember who you are, what you do. For us as a new department, I have a strategy that I have like kind of a tagline that I just repeat for our department. I'm like, just think of us like this. Like, okay, let's start there. Then this is how you kind of bring us in.
Yeah, that's funny. I've definitely experienced coming into a room and having everybody look at me like, "And who are you? What do you do?" Oh yeah. Oh, let me tell you.
Every strategist has heard that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let me explain what I'm doing here because I know you see my notebook and my glasses and you're wondering why I'm here. So do you start the repetition right then? At that point, you're starting to remind them, reinforce even the role of your team and your department, kind of what you're
yeah,
doing, and then everything is just
absolutely.
about repeating.
It is. And we came in and we're building what is essentially a comms planning function. I think at its simplest, and then there are some other there's some tentacles that come off that. But functionally, that's kind of where we sit, because we have different groups that have different creative and media responsibilities. So bringing those things together is, ironically enough, requires its own department.
How do
Um,
that is delicious irony. How do they? So I actually can understand why comms planning is a yet another spin on strategy. It's another place where you do need strategy. But I've been at agencies that didn't have comms planning. So I get a brand, especially a kind of a brand that has a storied history. I could see confusion of it. How do you message that? How have you effectively explained it to them?
I don't know that it's been effective yet. So so I'll stop short of co-signing on the premise of your question. But I will say what I'm trying to do is, I say that our job is to make creative and media work better together.
that's that's a solid explanation.
So that's it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of implications to that, but we don't, you know, I don't have any decision power over either. So it's really making sure that the right people are in the room at the right time, that we're surfacing the right questions so we can move forward, and that those things can work in sync. Um, but yeah, it's a challenge. Everyone has, kind of back to the baseball analogy, everyone has their own, the kind of their own goals, their own KPIs. So there's also that part of the language of making sure that we acknowledge that, the personal side, and it's not to belittle it. Like, I have my own KPIs too, right? But um, making sure that we account for the human side of it,
Yeah.
that these are people, and everyone should be recognized for what they're good at and should be part of the process.
Because that's the same, even you can extend that from in the brand organization through the agency. And then the agency has their own KPIs. They have their own goals. The creative team wants to do something different. Probably the art director might want to do something different than the creative director. And then the agency owner may want to do something different if it's a small shop, or, the account director may be trying to do something unique with the portfolio to go pitch something else. Then you hire a director, a production company. Guess what? They got opinions too. They have different things they want to do. So are you extending all the way out through that, or do you kind of put the ship in the water and just set it off and hope that
You know,
it got far enough with the agency concept that you can trust that it's going to be executed the way it was intended?
I think at this point, I work with our agencies a little bit, but my role is not really to comment on the agency's work, and to definitely not to get involved in, like, rough cuts, or any of that level. Even frankly, on the agency side, I would my engagement with the creative process, and the, I guess, post conceptual creative process varied by creative director, and sometimes pretty widely.
Yeah.
Where some would want, we were friends and we would just be talking about stuff, and I might have feedback on something. Others, for me, as I might have opinions on things, but I would try and stay objective on, like, does this do what it's supposed to do? Can it do what it's supposed to do? Do I need to get in the kitchen and, like, tell the chef to, take the chicken out?
Yeah.
Or, can we trust that the creatives and then all the different production partners they hire can bring this to life in an incredible way? So I would
How
always
did
choose the latter. you
Yeah.
know, and if something gets fucked up, that's a conversation to have later.
Is that your nature to be able to remain objective, or did you learn that in practice?
I think it's probably more my nature. I don't know. That's a good question. It's definitely something I work on.
Yeah.
Like Rob Campbell, who was at Deutsch for part of the time I was there.
He
That
has
was
no
one of
opinions
no,
whatsoever.
no. He never has opinions. Uh, and I just love Rob so much. But he would talk about that. You know, if ever we were kind of hitting a wall or whatever, just weren't, like the strategy wasn't working, whether it was clients or creatives or whoever, he would always just push us to be the objective voice. And um and also to be interesting, right? Not just calling balls and strikes, to keep using baseball analogies, but to deliver an objective, interesting voice, which kind of is a paradox in a way, but to surface the facts in a way that people find compelling and usable.
That's the job. That's the job. And what's interesting in an agency is hell of a lot different than what is interesting inside the brand. I mean, just the facts that you would surface that would become uh, interesting on a slide or interesting in a hallway conversation are just totally different things because
Dramatically could not be more different.
you're working on such different ends of the challenge where I can't imagine being inside the group that is producing the toy or producing the content at Conde and having to the number of things you're solving there and the difference between the no less valuable but totally different challenges you're solving inside an agency that somehow are on the same continuum. They're on different ends of it, and there's roles that are related, but the what's material and what's not material to each of those parts of the conversation. And sometimes it's interesting to see what was decided early on that pops back up
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the process when you're creating a print ad or something where you go, oh yeah, all of a sudden this decision that we had no part in really is shaping a lot of what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot more things to consider um, on this side, but I think the basics, um, the basics are still there. Like you can't overcomplicate communication. Um, there are things that, like, sometimes what you love about yourself isn't what other people are going to love about you. So you still have to have that insights function um, that guides how you communicate the thing that you really want to say, because you may think you have something that's incredibly innovative, and what people may love about it might be something much more pedestrian or simple, and you have to kind of let that surface.
Yeah. I mean, how do you do that with something like if it were nostalgia, how do you manifest that into something that drives because you're trying to get it couldn't just be nostalgia. You're trying to get to like what's the insight behind that. I'm sure that's what some of the
Yeah.
insights teams are driving it and trying to figure out is how do you know which is the insight that you go with and which is one that you could say, nah, not this one. This
I'll give
slide
you
I'm
an
gonna go past.
example from it was my last, I don't even think Deutsch made any work against it, but we were launching the Arteon for Volkswagen, and it was
Mhm.
it was kind of an evolution of the CC. It was like it was really low volume, so a lot of people probably haven't even seen it, but it's a four-door Sportback.
I remember the CC. I don't remember the Arteon very well.
So the CC was just a regular trunk. That the big difference was it was a liftback, but it was really sporty looking.
Mhm.
And the Germans were really proud of it, and just wanted to tell everyone, basically, look at this beautiful
Yeah,
thing we
they
made.
wanted to show it off.
And of course, we were going to show it off because it was a beautiful car. It looked great from a bunch of angles. If you've worked on automotive, you do these angle studies, and
Yeah.
we did focus groups. What was interesting was the type of person who would be attracted to a $40,000 Sportback from Volkswagen. The car made no sense. It didn't, like, why would you buy that? because
Yeah.
you buy it because you think for yourself. So what, and we never got to the point that we made work. So it's hard to, kind of Monday morning quarterback it. But to me, that was the interesting thing about it. That was the, you can't just, rather than just say, look how pretty we are, show how you're interesting in in this pretty, sculpted, architecturally designed vehicle.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a little bit of like, what are the things that go together? And we did a lot of consumer research. Volkswagen as a brand, at least at the time, that they've changed a bunch of things, but historically it's basically a tone. For a long time, I think up until 2016 or 17, the tone, I think for decades before that, was simple, human, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone could write to, or great copywriters and great creatives could concept to simple, human, cool. It was just, even just that was so sticky when you talk about repetition. So it's basically a tone that is meant to be magnetic toward a certain type of person, someone who thinks, who has refined taste but doesn't need to show off, who kind of it's like, you want nice things, you appreciate things, but you don't have to be ostentatious about it. So we did a lot of what certain creatives would say we over revved completely on audience insight. But to me, that was always the most interesting thing. It's that the cars are just, are cars, and they speak for themselves. And we'll show off, to your point on Subaru or Apple, we'll show off the features that we know matter in the segment.
You're going to get the specs, and the engineers are going to tell you, and with the client, what are the features you need to call out. And to some extent, that's going to drive at least some portion of the creative. You have to communicate the turbo, you have to communicate gas mileage, or whatever the feature is.
We're going to be responsible, but we're also going to, we also want to find a story that, is a little bit unexpected for the category. Yeah. I literally remember presenting to our clients at the time, the first draft of the first brief that I wrote for Arteon. And I forget exactly what it was, but I was talking about how the car doesn't make any sense. That was just full of contradictions, and that was what people would find interesting. And there was a long enough pause on the phone, and there was no video, that I thought they hung up. They were just like, what are you thinking? This is a car that we're proud of, that we want. And it was just, we eventually got there, and I actually used around the time, it was a little bit after that Snowbird 1-star review work had come out, where they found all these 1-star reviews, and people were like, it's too steep, the snow's too deep, whatever. So I use that as sort of this like cheeky example of, let's be self-effacing, but kind of bragging at the same time.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You found a way to make something interesting to people that is maybe not so interesting on its own, because as you said, of course it's going to be lit beautifully for 2 days. And of course we're going to get the angles right. And of course it's going to look beautiful, but we have to find a way in for people to have an emotional, like, care about it, versus just saying, oh, well, here comes another car commercial.
Right.
Now that you're on the brand side, how would you have received that brief from either internal or external, or how would you position it differently if you were going to, did you learn anything about the way you sell strategy and the way you communicate strategy?
I think, yeah, I have. I think at the time,
I could see the resolve. You're like, yes, actually, yes. I know that.
Sometimes you have to mess up a couple times to, I think at the time I was trying to break from what is my instinct as a strategist, which is to be very factual and to be pretty straight, and to find interesting things, but sort of leave it 80% done and let the creative finish it. And not, I've always thought, that to me, like, I put the way more work in the top of the brief than the bottom, in defining the problem, exploring who the audience is, then align, then this like strategy line. I just, they're kind of disposable, and creatives sometimes see them as competitive with coming up with a campaign line or whatever.
Sometimes they do, yeah.
So, but I think I was, exploring other ways to do strategy and trying to be a little more bombastic. And I think actually the problem was less that, it was just that I didn't have a very good landing point. I didn't have that, the way I had articulated what we were going to say about it just wasn't quite right. And so I think my clients were right to not, jump on board.
Yeah. You didn't give them the resolution. And so therefore that means we're going to do something that could be like this.
Yeah.
To give them that resolved feeling that it's been solved, versus maybe that sounds like you're presenting us a problem to figure out.
Yeah, like I'm giving them a political mess.
I think you just said this doesn't make any sense and we don't know what we're supposed to do with that. Although as talking to you, I know exactly what that brief is and the way you explained it. But I think you've had time to simmer on it. Maybe
I've thought about it a lot since.
Yeah, maybe that's not how it got presented.
I didn't present it. Yeah, I didn't present it. I wish I had it still, but I didn't present it exactly like that.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of time to think about it. And yeah.
Nice. Well, Ben, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for making time to join me. It's been a pleasure just kind of talking through the process and learning a little bit more about your path and the differences between some of the fun places you've been. Where can people find you online?
I think I have at Ben_Perreira I definitely have it on Twitter, definitely on Instagram. So if anyone wants to see a bunch of photos of, I don't know, places around California, that's pretty much all I take photos of. Twitter, you get some sizzling hot takes at times.
Super hot takes.
Sometimes some more earnest takes. So I try and mix it up a little bit.
I like it.
LinkedIn. I'm one of two Ben Perreiras. I'm not the fashion blogger. So
yet. Give it time.
Yeah.
You're gonna get there.
I do get a lot of invitations every year during Fashion Week. So I need to just I need to cash in on those. I think people think I'm the other one. Yeah, at Ben_Perreira.
I'll definitely link to that in the notes here. But Ben, thank you so much for joining me. It's been awesome.
Adam, thanks so much. It's my pleasure.
Strategy Inside Everything is produced by me, Adam Pierno. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. It really helps. If someone shared this with you and you're just not sure where you can find it, you can go to specific.substack.com and sign up there and get episodes before everybody else. For more information about me, Adam Pierno, you can go to adampierno.com. There's information about my books, my speaking, and my strategy work. Have an idea for a guest? Send it my way. Just go to adampierno.com and you'll find a form there that'll help you connect. Thanks for listening.